So I'm delighted this morning to introduce our guest speaker for the day, Dr. Ryan Burge. And I want to take a moment to really share a bit about him before we dig in, because his resume is impressive. Not to embarrass you, Ryan. Ryan is an American political scientist, statistician, professor, and until 2024 was an American Baptist pastor. His research focuses on the impact of religion on American life, especially politics. His popular Substack newsletter, Graphs About Religion, has tens of thousands of subscribers and is read by millions of times annually. He's a well-known data analyst with work appearing in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, Politico, and has been featured on 60 Minutes. His debut book, The Nones, N-O-N-E-S, Where They Came From, Who They Are, and Where They're Going, explores the dramatic rise of non-religious Americans and offers explanations for this seismic cultural shift. His next book, 20 Myths About Religion and Politics in America, addressed widespread misconceptions about religion, politics, and their intersection. In 2023, he collaborated to write The Great De-Churching: Who's Leaving, why are they going, and what will it take to bring them back? And in 2024, he published The American Religious Landscape: Facts, Trends, and the Future. His forthcoming book, The Vanishing Church: How the Hollowing Out of Moderate Congregations is Hurting Democracy, Faith, and Us, examines religious polarization and its broader implications for American society. Please help me welcome Dr. Ryan Burge.
That was very nice. Thank you, Reverend Charlotte. I appreciate that. I don't know what to do during moments like that. I'm like, do I look down? Do I wave? Do I smile? I don't know. But thanks for having me. And by the way, the fact you guys have this many kids in your church, I go to churches all the time. They would die to have a tenth of those number of children. Oh my, I was thinking to myself, wow, you guys are doing it here.
Thank you. I think we're doing it too.
Yeah. I go to a lot of churches, they're not doing it.
So let's start a little bit. We're going to engage in a little bit of kind of back and forth question, and then we're going to open it up to you all, okay? So I want you to start a little bit from the personal. What made you interested in studying the intersection of religion and politics?
So I grew up in a small town in rural southern Illinois in the 1990s, Southern Baptist Church, evangelical. You guys know who William Jennings Bryan is? His great-great-grandparents were members of my church. He was born and raised in Salem, Illinois. Fun fact, the Scopes monkey trial, John Scopes graduated from Salem Community High School, and guess who gave the address there? William Jennings Bryan. So my entire life has sort of been this weird tangle of religion and politics and society, and I grew up very evangelical in the 90s, which when evangelicalism was very popular, It was the religious right is taking over. And then I went to college, went to a Free Methodist school, and I sort of started to use a phrase, deconstruct all those things that I grew up with. And then I realized I still wanted to be part of a faith community, but I wanted to be a part of a different faith community. And then I sort of fell into pastoring because in rural Illinois, there are not many options for pastors. And so I was I guess we'll give this guy the job guy. And I'm also the least successful pastor in American history. I've been on staff of 3 churches in my life, all in the American Baptist faith. The first one, I was youth pastor there for 3 years. They're down to about 30 on a good Sunday. The second church was called Water Street Baptist Church. I was there for a year. I was the youngest person there by 50 years. I'm not exaggerating. That church closed, and they actually tore the building down, which I didn't realize until about a year ago. And I drove by, and I was like, wait, it's supposed to be there, and it's not there anymore. And then the church I was just a pastor at for 17 and a half years, First Baptist Church of Mount Vernon, Illinois, we closed in July of 2024. So if you want your church to close down,
now he tells us.
Just hire me and wait. But beyond all that, I just wanted to do something I think that people care about. I don't want to try to convince people that what I'm doing is interesting. When I get on an airplane and people ask me what I do, I say I'm a consultant because I don't want to have that conversation. But when I walk in other rooms, I say I study religion and politics, and people are not like, oh, let's talk about the weather. They want to talk about what I do for a living, so.
Well, do you get a chance in your work to study Unitarian Universalists?
I wish I could, guys. There's just not very many of you out there. I know you're working on it. So according to the UU records, it's less than 200,000 members in the United States. And obviously there's more than that because there's sort of people who come to church but aren't members. But you've got to realize in a country of 340 million people, 200,000 is a rounding error, really. And that's what I struggle with is everyone matters. I really do believe that everyone matters. But like a chapter in 20 Myths was researchers are biased towards Christians. And that's a myth. We're just biased towards big numbers. So there's a lot of you, we're going to study you more. There's less of you, we just can't study you. So in most surveys, Unitarians are not even an option in the drop-down menu. You could check something else and write that in like the free response box. But let me tell you, the free response box of those surveys are nightmares, okay? People are like, I'm an ancient alien theorist. One guy said, I'm an atheist, but my wife's a Lutheran, and I go to church with her. And I was like, but what is that? Like, how do I classify that? So you can write that in the box, but unfortunately, there's just not, numerically speaking, it's just a really hard group to get our arms around. I wish we could do more surveys. You'd have to almost do a specialized survey where you would just look just at people who are self-selected as Unitarians. But right now, we just don't have the data on it, unfortunately.
Well, before we get to the present, can you tell us a little bit, very generally, about the religious trends in the U.S. over the past 75, 100 years-ish, and how did this correspond with political trends during this period?
Let's talk about my entire field in 3 minutes, right? Gosh, I don't even know how to. So obviously the biggest story is the rise of the nuns, N-O-N-E-S. And by the way, that's not my word. That word's been around for at least 60 years now. I just unfortunately popularized it. So I'm like, you invented a term. I did not invent the term. That's the biggest trend in the last 40 years or so. Since the early 1990s, I mean, the nuns were 5% of America in 1972, and they were 6% of America in 1991, and now they're 30% of America overall. Among Gen Z, they're 42 or 43% of Generation Z. So that's what the future looks like. But the other big trend, which, do you guys know what a mainline Protestant is? Methodists, Episcopalians, Presbyterians, basically Protestants who are not evangelicals are mainline Protestants. And in the 1950s in America, mainline Protestant Christianity dominated American life, American society, American culture. These were churches that had, huge endowments and huge influence. And those churches were, half of Americans were mainline Protestant in 1958, and now the share of Americans who are mainline Protestants is 8.5%. And very quickly sliding below 5% because the average mainline Protestant now is about 60 years old. So you start doing that math and you start, actually have a post coming out in a month saying, when's half your church going to be dead? Morbid, I know. But I think these churches don't fully realize, like, they're not going to make it. In some of these, in the United Methodist Church in 20 years, they're going to lose somewhere between 35 and 40% of their members through death. And so this once great tradition that used to sort of stand in the middle of American religion, it was sort of moderate, saw both sides, is going to disappear or become almost completely culturally irrelevant, society irrelevant. So to me, those are the two big moves. Smaller religious groups obviously have gone from a rounding error to being somewhat significant. So about 7% of Americans are, anything that's not Christian or none. It used to be 1%, now it's 7%. So those are, Jews and Latter-day Saints and Muslims and, Buddhists and all those something else people. So they're growing, but they're still, most of those groups are 1% of America. I think people are fascinated by this. There's a show called The Real Housewives of Salt Lake City and Secret Lives of Mormon Wives. Do you guys know what percentage of Americans are Latter-day Saints? It's 1%. There's 6 million Latter-day Saints in the United States, and yet we, in our minds, we make them into these huge groups. So part of my job is to sort of put things in perspective, right? Of saying, who's big, who's small, who's growing, who's not. And the answer is the main line's down, the nuns are up. Evangelicals are actually the same size today as they were 50 years ago. 20-ish% of Americans even today. So when people say religion's declining, I have to say, what kind? What kind of religion's declining? So it's a really mixed picture. Now, politics. American religion, especially white American religion, is overwhelmingly conservative now. And it wasn't always the case. That's actually one of the central theses of the new book. If you look at evangelicals, white evangelicals in the 1970s were majority Democrats. Even through the late 1980s, we're actually politically divided, 45 and 45%. And so what we're seeing with the white church becoming more Republican, that's a very modern phenomenon. White Catholics used to be, Kennedy Democrats, and now 65% of white Catholics voted for Donald Trump in 2024. Even the main line, which are considered to be a liberal main line, 60% of United Methodists voted for Donald Trump. 52% of evangelical Lutherans voted for Trump. So there is really Episcopalians, they're only 30% Trump voters, and Unitarians are really what I would say majority white religion that are not majority Republican. And it used to not be that way. And so we're seeing sort of politics and religion sort on these lines where it's like, if you're religious, you have to be a Republican if you're white. And if you're non-religious, you have to be a Democrat. And I think that's actually making some of the divides we're facing in American society even harder to overcome, because we don't have these mixing spaces anymore that used to exist not that long ago. I mean, 30 years ago, if you went to a Southern Baptist church, you were just as likely to sit next to a Democrat as you were to sit next to a Republican. And now it's 80% Republicans. And I think that's part of the problem we're facing as a country, is we're so politically, polarized and sorted out right now. So.
Well, that brings us to one of the questions I had for you, which is this upcoming book. You kind of posit, hey, churches have become so politically polarized that they've lost their identity as that third place that you're talking about, where people commingle on equal footing and nurture relationships there. I think this is a great strength of faith communities. As we identify this way in the way that we approach our theology, right? We have deep diversity of theology and belief within our congregations, but we are also a progressive faith tradition whose values often very clearly align with a more liberal political party. So how do congregations like ours hold on to their values and not water them down, while also nurturing that important identity and culture of being a third place?
This might be the hardest question of all, right? Is how do we stick to what we believe, but also build these bridges to people who are different than us? And, in the book, I tell the story of the Rwandan genocide, which was this terrible, terrible genocide that happened in Rwanda in 1994 between the Hutus and the Tutsis, and where 1 million people died a month for 3 months in a row. And by the way, America did nothing to stop it. Thanks, Bill Clinton. But if you go back and listen to the rhetoric that happened before the genocide happened, their radio broadcasts are archived. And what one side would call the other side was vermin and insects. They would dehumanize the other side. And dehumanization is on the track towards genocide. And we see this in our rhetoric now, I think. We dehumanize. And both sides are guilty of this, by the way. I mean, I hear it from left, right, and center. And the problem is we don't know the humanity of the other. And I think every faith community teaches us to see the humanity in the other, that every human being has worth and infinite value like we do. And if you don't know someone who's different than you, it's easy to hate those people. I've been in spaces where they'll say, well, if you voted for X, if you voted for Harris, you're a baby killer. Or if you voted for Trump, you're a racist. You know what a great way to end a conversation is? By calling people racists and baby killers. Right? We have to see the humanity in the other side, and we also live in a two-party system, essentially, where you only have a binary choice, right? It's either this side or that side. And a lot of people hold their nose and vote for one side or the other side, and yet we act like they're so straight and they believe everything the party believes, everything. And I have so many conversations where we have real discussion about immigration or abortion or whatever, and you'd be amazed the number of people from the left and the right go, you know what, I agree with you a whole lot more than I thought I did before we came into this conversation. It's just social media has ruined our brains, guys. Guess who goes viral on social media? The 10% on the far left and the 10% on the far right. That's who gets all the retweets and the shares and the clicks and the likes. Where almost the whole algorithms are designed for those kind of interactions, and they make us forget what normal is. And most Americans, there's actually a chapter in the book, which is my favorite chapter, called, Are We as Polarized as We Think We Are? And the answer is we're not. If you actually look at lots of data, most Americans are slightly right of center or slightly left of center on all kinds of issues, but we don't see that in each other. And so it's good to be in communities where you feel affirmed and there are people like you, but you also need to find ways in your life to be in conversation with people who are different than you, who look different, who think different, who vote different. I mean, that's how we get through as American democracy, because if we don't have that, we don't have compromise. And we didn't have compromise in the House of Representatives, and we didn't have a Speaker of the House for 3 weeks. Do you guys remember this? We didn't have a government that functioned for 3 weeks because there were people on one side who said that compromise is a dirty word. In a democratic system, you have to compromise to get things done. We've always been like that, and we're always going to be like that. And the way we do it personally is by finding ways to compromise in our own lives with people on things that we're willing to compromise on, right? Not the core things that we believe, but there are some things in that gray area that we can see the other side in. Unfortunately, religion has become a way to divide us. And I think that's actually a thesis of the book is the reason we hate religion is because we hate what religion's become, which is a way to say us versus them. You know, religion used to be way more than that. The community that you guys have here is the most valuable thing you can possibly have. I mean, I want to affirm you guys. And from a social science perspective, gathering together with people like this on a regular basis is so incredibly good for us. We need more of it. And we meet more in diverse spaces, too.
Thank you. I think, one of our kind of bylines as Unitarian Universalists is the inherent dignity and worth of all people. And so naming that feels like a political statement, right?
It can, yeah, absolutely.
So I think getting proximate, as Brian Stevenson has asked us to do, getting proximate to those who are suffering, proximate to those who are very different than we are, humanizes both them and ourselves as we see them in us. Well, thank you for that. I wanted to talk a little bit about the individuals, the nuns that you were speaking about before. Are these folks that you feel are kind of on the they don't go to a religious community at all? They don't have religious community in any way. They may attend congregations like ours, but they don't classify themselves as religious, which we do have quite a large number of folks in Unitarian Universalist spaces who would say, I'm a nun, but I'm here every Sunday, right? Is it the nuns made up more of folks like that, or folks who really are completely separate from religious spaces? And are those individuals that you feel like will ever return, or are content living outside of that structure?
So there's this group of, we classify the nuns, there's 3 types: atheist, agnostic, and a third group called nothing in particular. Because that's exactly what the option says on the survey, is they look at all the options and go, nah, I'm good. That's about 20% of America are nothing in particulars. And among 18 to 22-year-olds, that's the most popular option on the survey. 1/3 of them say they're nothing in particular. And from a purely social science standpoint, I think this is a group I worry about very much so. Because they not only do they drop out of religion, which is whatever, but they also have the lowest educational attainment of any religious group. They also have the lowest income of any religious group. They're also the least politically engaged of any religious group. So it feels like they're dropping out of everything in American life. And I think that's very problematic. These are the people who, they don't have any, there's no ladder for them to climb because they're not part of any social organization that lets them climb and move to a sort of a higher echelon of life. And they're left out, left behind, forgotten. And those people, I mean, they have despair. Hold on. They have despair in their lives. And despair, to me, is the most toxic of all ideas, right? It's the idea that my life won't get better and my kids' lives won't be better than my life. And so what's interesting about them is they actually are willing to come back to a house of worship. About 20% of them will come back over a 9-year period of time. They don't hate religion. We ask all kinds of questions about religion. They don't think it's like child abuse or it needs to be eradicated. They're just apathetic is the best way I would describe them. And let's be honest here, apathy can be lethal. It's lethal to our souls. It's lethal to our communities. These people are, and you know what a lot of them do? A lot of them watch a lot of YouTube. And that's really scary because the algorithms just give you more of what you want. I was listening to this podcast called Rabbit Hole, and it was this kid, I swear he has to be a nothing in particular. He was 18 years old, grew up in rural Iowa, went to the University of Iowa, got kicked out for drinking in the dorms, came back to his hometown, is the manager of the Dairy Queen. And they ask him, what do you do all day when you're not working? He goes, I watch YouTube 6 or 8 hours a day. And at one point, he was a misogynist. Like, he started watching this guy named Stefan Molyneux, who's a terrible human being, who basically hates women, hates people of color, and he believed all that stuff, and then a year later, he became a Bernie Sanders socialist because the algorithm sort of gave him more content on the socialist side. And it's like if you don't have any sort of any community that tells you like, okay, we can believe this and we can't believe this, we can think this and we can't think this, what are you left with? You don't have any sort of like guardrails in your lives. And I'm more and more worried these nothing in particulars have no social structure in their life, whether it be religion or a job or, wise people in their lives to say, hey, don't believe that, don't say that, don't go down that road. That's a bad road to go down. And unfortunately, with no gatekeepers in the world, they can see all this content they would never see before. And without those guardrails, I just worry that that's a bleak future for them and for us as a society. And what comes out of that? I mean, I can't help but think extremism and racism and misogyny and hate crimes are all going to come out of those things. So that's the kind of group of people I really do worry about, from a social science perspective. And they're growing, especially among the young people.
Well, follow-up question, what are the ways that congregations like ours can engage those group of nuns? Is there something that we can do to help provide them with that community and those guardrails, so to speak, as you said?
So interestingly enough, there was Pew did a landscape survey. They asked, do you think religious communities are good social hubs for the area? Even a majority of non-religious people said yes. So they actually see the value. Even non-religious people see the social value of religion. And I think this is something I've been telling churches over and over again. Listen, from a Christian perspective, no one became a Christian because they lost the argument. Evangelicals love to do what's called apologetics, which is basically like defend the faith and have these like high-level discussions about soteriology and transubstantiation and all. You know what people actually want? Community. That's all they want. They want to be part of something that feels like there's value and worth and hope in the future, and you're working towards something. And so that's why I think houses of worship are so incredibly important in a society in which we become more socially atomized than ever. We're not Robert Putnam wrote a book called Bowling Alone, where he says, we stopped going to the Elks and the Moose and the VFW and the Boy Scouts and the Girl Scouts and all those things and bowling leagues. And guess what we've seen? That book came out in 1999. You know what he blamed it all on? Cable television. Because people can watch 100 channels now in their house. What a crazy idea. Now I can watch 1 billion channels in our house. So whatever he saw in 1999, we're seeing that 100-fold. And now the default mode for a lot of people, especially a lot of young people, is to not do social things. Here's what I've learned in my life. Every time I book something to go do, go out with friends, 2 hours work, I don't want to do this. I don't want to do this. And then I end up going and doing it and coming home and going, man, I'm glad I did that. And then a week later, you know what's going to happen? The exact same cycle is going to happen. These people need to know they have a community of people where they feel welcomed, engaged, informed, involved, and lead with the social aspect of what religion can do. Because we can fight about, Islam, Christianity, Judaism, all those things. But at the end of the day, if people feel welcomed and loved and affirmed and part of something, they're going to keep coming back. I mean, I tell pastors all the time, I go, your sermon doesn't matter. It doesn't. How many people have who ever said, you know what, I go to that church because the sermon's great, but I don't like any of the people that are there? But how many times you heard someone say, I go to the sermon's not that great, but I go because all my friends are there and I have a community there?
Never. I've never heard that before.
Never, not once. But it's the truth. You guys, in many ways, just you sitting in the pews is salvific. It saves you, from yourself, from your own ideas, from your selfishness, from your inner voice, all those things. And this is what lifts people up during their darkest hours. And I think young people, they don't see that because they haven't felt that yet. And if they would see that and feel that, I think it would change everything for them. And it would, at the same time, I think it would actually make America better, make democracy better, make our world a better place just by going to a house of worship. And I'm going to write a book at some point called You Should Go to Church Even If You Don't Believe in Any of It. Because I really do believe in the social value of just gathering together like we're gathering right now. There's just so much power in that.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm going to ask, I think, one more question before I open it up to you all, which is, I think this congregation had a major shift in numbers when COVID hit, not unlike every other congregation in the United States and probably around the world. Can you talk a little bit about what you've seen in the shift in religious spaces since COVID?
So the short answer is not much, because the traditions that were already dying were dying before COVID. And so if you see they're down 5% after COVID, it's like, well, did COVID do that, or we were going to decline 5% anyway? So it's hard to untangle those two ideas, right? As decline was happening, I think it hit congregations with an older average age much harder than a younger average age. And so, let's be honest, Unitarians tend to be a little bit of an older crowd. I mean, I've been to several UU churches, and it's a lot of gray-haired folks. Guess who was most impacted by COVID? Older people. Guess who was the least likely to come back soon after COVID? Older people. So what's wild about this whole story is, though, then I'll go to like an evangelical church in Birmingham, and they'll say, oh, we're up 100% after COVID, because they were in a red state, and they're young people, and they came back sooner. So I think it had a very sort of lumpy impact on religion. Like some places, it definitely accelerated the decline. Some places, it actually had no impact on the decline. And I think it's hard, like when COVID started, everyone was like, well, I think people have time to reevaluate what they believe about religion, so they might come back or they might not. I think in reality, what most people realized was whatever they were doing before, they want to keep doing. To put a number on this, though, I actually looked at 4 different Protestant denominations and their attendance the 10 years before COVID and then last year, to sort of see if you projected that trajectory, what would they be like? And most denominations report a decline of about 7 or 8% in attendance, in excess of what it would have already been just through their natural decline. So I think that's the number, between 5 and 10%, I think, as many religious traditions have declined because of COVID. But again, that's macro level. Some churches have done very well, some churches have done very poorly. It just depends on all kinds of geographic factors, demographic factors, all that kind of stuff.
Well, thank you. I'm going to open it up to some questions. Does anyone have a question for? Okay. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I'm curious how the spiritual but not religious as a faction are faring.
So that's a good. So we have this. I'm going to stand up, Charlotte. There's this idea called SB&Rs, spiritual but not religious, is what we call them. About a quarter of non-religious people we classify as SB&Rs. But here's what's really interesting about it. A lot of people say, well, I'm not religious, but I'm very spiritual. The data says those people are rare. That actually spirituality and religion run on the same track with each other. Religious people are more spiritual, and spiritual people are more religious. So we asked 12,000 nuns, how important is spirituality to you? From not at all to very important. And 25% of them said it was very important, and 25% said it was not important at all. Among Christians, 61% said it was very important, and 15% said it was not important at all. So I think this word spirituality, for whatever reason, has been sort of tied up with traditional understandings of religion. And so we just don't see in the data this huge number of people who are saying, well, I'm exploring, we ask a whole battery question. The last 30 days, have you done meditation, yoga, crystals, saging your house, all kinds of new age spiritual practices? And what we found, interestingly enough, was the nuns engaged in none of those practices with higher frequency than religious people did. So they're actually, the conclusion, we had this big study called the Nuns Project, and the big conclusion was non-religious people are not replacing religion with spirituality, they're replacing it with nothing. The evidence just does not point towards, like we had this God-shaped hole. You heard that phrase before? Blaise Pascal talked about that. We had this God-shaped hole. Guess what? A lot of nuns don't seem like they have a God-shaped hole and don't seem like they're worse for it, which thank God I'm not a theologian because I can't explain that theologically. I can just tell you what the data says, which is my favorite thing to say ever, which is let me show you what the data says and then you figure out what it means.
Thank you. Yeah. Next question.
This may be a little political.
Never. Never.
But if you look at white Christian nationalism.
Yeah.
And a number of us may view that there is something totally contradictory to our understanding of what Jesus stood for, which was inclusion, and their interpretation of Christianity seems to be exclusion. And that seems to be what has led to what is at the leadership of our country right now. So how do you explain that dominance?
So we are starting to believe in political science. For a long time, we believed that religion was first and politics were downstream of that, right? So you're like, who would Jesus vote for? And then you go vote for whoever Jesus told you to vote for, I guess. But you know what we realize more and more now, the data says? Politics is first and religion is second. So basically, you'll interpret the Bible in such a way that justifies your own position. There's this far right-wing account I follow on Twitter, which I shouldn't, but I have to for my job. And this person basically makes this like 1,000-word explication for why Christian nationalism is biblically justified. And I was looking at the passages. I'm an amateur theologian at best, but go, that's not what those passages mean. Like, you're taking a very odd reading of like, and you're mashing it together to like make a point that it doesn't make. But guess what? Liberals do the exact same stuff too. That's uncomfortable to say, isn't it now? But we read the Bible in such a way that makes us feel like we're being affirmed. If you're a Christian, you know, you're being affirmed in what you believe. Like, the Bible clearly says that universal health care is the kingdom mandate. I don't know, does it? Like, I'm not sure of that either. So you get my point here. We're reading whatever our holy text is. We're reading it through a political lens and then using that to justify what we believe and how we vote, saying Jesus would have to vote for a Democrat or Jesus must vote for a Republican. I mean, I'm a Christian, and I believe that, you know, Christians of good conscience can vote for either party and find biblical justification for either position. That's a crazy thing to say, I think, anymore. But that's where we are, is I think Christian nationalism is an idea who people have a political idea about nationalism and then use the Bible to justify their own belief, which is not how the Bible was supposed to be used, I think. But what do I know? I'm just a political scientist.
Well, thank you. I think we could probably ask questions for the rest of eternity because this is really interesting, but we are going to have to wrap up. So I wanted to end with one last question, which is, what are your hopes for religion in America in the next 5, 10 years?
So I think we're young. A lot of young people are growing up without religious backgrounds. Like, everyone when I was growing up had a religious background of one kind or another, and I think these people, it's easier to go from 0 to positive as opposed to negative to positive, if that makes any sense. They have to throw off all the baggage they had growing up. There is some evidence that younger people, the UK has seen an interesting revival in religion. And the UK used to be an incredibly secular place. So I do think there's sort of, the pendulum swings in societies, right? I think the pendulum's definitely swung toward secularism in the last 30 years, but it feels like it's sort of hit that peak over here and the pendulum might be swinging back. And I just hope, my bigger hope is not about religion specifically, but about social organizations. My hope is that young people realize the value in just hanging out with other human beings, seeing the value of being in diverse communities, and join. If they can't believe in Jesus or Buddha or Muhammad, they would come to a place like a UU church and just find community there. They would find a Baptist church or a Catholic church or a synagogue or a mosque, some place. Because the alternative is there's no social organizations in most part of America now, or not large scale. So find something, invent something, create something. That's the hope that I have, is that these people will see the value in just being part of community. Because, again, like I said, I think community can save us from ourselves. And that's my hope for the future of American religion and American society.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Well, when Ryan and I were talking about this exchange, one of the things he said was, I'm just a statistician. So if what I say makes you happy, great. If it ticks you off, great. Doesn't matter. It's just the facts. So thank you so much for sharing all of your insights. We appreciate you taking the time to come and be with us today.